Nonprofit Insider.
Driving, music's blaring in my ears. Engines roaring, the horizon's drawing near. Pedal to the floor, no more feet in the door. Gonna drive right out of this bitter night. I'm a constant seeker and converse sneaker.
Welcome to Nonprofit Insider. My name is David Unger, and I'm pleased to be hosting a show with executive directors and key people of local nonprofits. I've worked in the nonprofit world for over 30 years, and in those years I've realized that the majority of the community does not know about the organizations that provide critical services and benefits to our community that we sometimes take for granted. Nonprofit Insider is a chance to hear about the organizations that touch so many in our community. The opinions expressed in Nonprofit Insider are not necessarily those of WMPG, its staff and underwriters, or of USM. On today's show, we have Amy Lent. Amy's the executive director of the Maine Maritime Museum. Hi, Amy.
Hi, Dave. It's great to see you again.
How are you?
I'm great.
Good. So this is your first exposure to community radio, isn't it?
Well, my first exposure speaking on it, not my first exposure listening to it.
Well, so you got a real nice view of how community radio operates today with everybody running around. Our Weather Central was on our cell phones today. So, welcome to WMPG. It's great to have you here. So, how would you describe what the Maine Maritime Museum is?
Maine Maritime Museum is a spectacular historic shipyard. We're located in Bath on the banks of the Kennebec River, and the museum preserves the only intact remaining historic shipyard where the largest wooden ships were built. When I say the only one, I mean literally the only one left in America. So the campus consists of 20 acres. There's 18 buildings. Several of them are original historic buildings. A large gallery for museum space and education. We have a boat shop. We have boats out on the river giving tours over the summer. And in 2012, we unveiled, we couldn't, I guess, exactly cover it up, but the sculpture of the Wyoming. So it's a sculptural evocation in real size of the largest wooden sailing ship ever built in America. And again, not ever built in Maine or historically, but literally the largest wooden sailing ship ever built in this country before or since at 444 feet. It's a spectacular sight, and we raised 620-foot masts on that sculpture in June of 2012. Last year, or this past summer rather, we unveiled a new blacksmith shop exhibit. It's an industrial-sized building that shows the level of work that was done in the shipyard. So a lot of history there, but also a lot of contemporary maritime stories that are happening.
Is it just Maine-based, or is it nationally?
Primarily Maine and a little bit of New England, because of course Casco Bay, the Gulf of Maine, is
right.
Extends beyond our state borders, but primarily it's a Maine maritime story that we're telling.
How many visitors do you get a year?
We get about 60,000 visitors a year.
Really?
From all over the country and all over the world.
I never would have thought that.
Well, we just had an economic impact statement updated by Chuck Lawton for a grant that we were submitting, and he reported that of all the museums in Maine, Maine Maritime Museum has more visitors from out of state. 84%, in fact, of our seasonal visitors are from out of state. So, of course, that changes this time of year. But more visitors from out of state who come in larger groups, stay longer, and spend more money than all other museums in Maine.
Wow.
So that's pretty cool.
You and I had the opportunity to work together, maybe 10 years ago, I'm thinking.
Well, I've been there for 8.5 years,
So
and it was not long after I
right,
first
you
started.
had just started
Yeah.
there, and I had the opportunity to spend a lot of time on the campus. And I got to tell you, if you haven't been out there, you really should make a trek out there. It's really spectacular.
It is spectacular. That's the word.
It is. What are some of the issues that you see in the long term that the museum will be facing?
Well, what I was just describing, the large number of visitors from out of state, of course, is great. And when we got that economic impact statement, we were thrilled to see that. And my first reaction was, wow, we've got more out-of-state visitors than anybody, and they're spending all this money in Mid-Coast Maine, which of course is great for the local economy. And then I thought, but wait a second, that means that we're not getting as many local visitors as we ought to be getting. So there's another side to that. So that's right now, I would say, my biggest problem, the thing that I'm puzzling over all the time is, how do we communicate the excellence of what we have and encourage more people from Maine to visit and experience it? Because it's a Maine story, and people from, this Maine community ought to be enjoying it.
Right.
And in the past 3 years, 2 different publications have named the museum one of the best maritime museums in the world.
Huh.
So, that's huge, right?
Right.
And great recognition. And we get comments from visitors on our guest book and on Expedia and notes that get sent to me pretty regularly that it's one of the best museums they've ever been to. Somebody from New Zealand will say, it's the best museum I've ever been to anywhere.
Well, we take it for granted because it's right in our backyard.
Right. So, that's great. And I love hearing it, of course. But, how do we get people from South Portland to drive 40 minutes to Bath and experience what people from New Zealand are traveling halfway around the world?
Excuse me. So, it's more than Bath. It's the area that you're in is just pristine.
It is. It's the museum so I got there, as we mentioned, about 8.5 years ago. And at the time, we were focusing almost entirely on a 19th century shipbuilding story. And, that's obviously the foundation for what the museum is all about. But we have since expanded to really focus on the history and the present and the future of both, maritime industries. Boat building, obviously, is the big one in our neighborhood, but also maritime ecology. Without a healthy maritime ecology, the rest of it kind of falls apart, for Maine, really. So ecology, fisheries, we're working right now on a big exhibit on the lobstering industry that we're going to be completely overhauling and hoping to open next summer. So we would need about 3 more sessions I'm not even going to talk about the lobstering exhibit, because once I get started, I can't stop. But that kind of story. So really expanding beyond what the museum was traditionally known for as purely a shipbuilding story into, if it has to do with maritime, we are part of that story and we try and tell it to our visitors.
Now, you have a board of directors and the committee
We
structure
do.
and everything else. How many volunteers do you think you utilize?
We have a board of 26 people right now.
Statewide or local?
It's across Maine and some in Massachusetts. We have a board of 26 to 28 people, 26 members on our board right now, and a volunteer corps of 250.
Wow.
So yeah, it's almost doubled since I first got there. So many people who work in every single aspect of the museum, from landscaping to curatorial work.
Now, if I remember correctly, you also have the opportunity to host events out there if you wanted to.
We do. In fact, just last night, the Maine Association of Nonprofits had a big conference at our facility, which was cool. We had directors and board members from nonprofits all over, mostly the Mid-Coast and Portland, at the museum last night, talking about boards and what works and what doesn't and how can we make them function better, things like that.
So I'm going to put you on the spot here. I apologize. No, I don't.
That's okay.
What would you say would make a successful board or a board member?
Well, this is what we were talking about last night, and it's funny. You said you're going to put me on the spot. I'm a museum director. I'm used to being put on the spot. It happens all the time. So what would make a successful board member?
Yes.
Is someone who is, at the very entry level, you need to have an interest in the organization, an interest in what they do. So, there's that. You've got to be somewhat committed to giving of your time, because there is a significant amount of time involved. Hopefully reasonable, able to get along with a lot of different kind of people, because a board of trustees is going to have people of every type, and everybody has to work well with each other. So, in fact, around our group at this session last night talking about board development, we agreed that reasonable and interested and enthusiastic beats extreme passion any day. So, someone who's interested, committed, enthusiastic about what the museum is doing, has expertise to offer, museum or whatever the nonprofit is, expertise to offer that's relevant to what the organization is trying to accomplish. And very often it requires financial capacity to support the organization.
Very often?
Some boards, there's a handful of boards out there that are not fundraising boards. Most of them do require, and frankly, I think should require some financial commitment.
Right.
Because that's what it takes at the end.
I've been raising money in various communities for over 30 years, and unless the board can actually sit down and write a check, a gift of value, whatever that it's determined as, why would anybody else want to give to the organization if the board can't?
Right. Or won't. Yeah.
Right.
So I agree.
So a couple weeks ago, Governor LePage, in a post-election interview, where I'm
We're all
going with
talking about that one, yes.
Yeah. He made the statement that nonprofits don't pay their fair share. They're takers and not givers.
Yeah. Well, of course, I would disagree.
You want some time to think about this one?
I would disagree with that comment. In fact, I would say that, this is one of the problems that the nonprofit sector has as a whole, because there's people who have that idea. What nonprofits do, and, there's exceptions to every rule, but as a rule in this country, nonprofits are doing work that society wants to see done. Okay, so in the case of cultural organizations, they want to see history preserved. They want to see culture made accessible to a lot of different people. You don't have to be super wealthy in order to see fine art or see beautiful historic treasures. So society believes that that is a value that we share. So society needs to fund that. And if it were something that could be, I'll just speak to museums here. If museums were the kind of business that could make a lot of money and make people rich, profit-oriented businesses would be going into it and doing it. The fact is, it's expensive to preserve history. It's expensive to educate people. It's expensive to have climate control that preserves rare historic treasures. And you're not going to ever make a lot of money doing it. So it has to be supported in some way. And, if, we're not... God, it's one of these things. You could just go on and on a rant on this whole thing. But, the fact is nonprofits in general are providing services that the government won't provide, that people want. So, how does that define a taker? I don't know. I think it's kind of the other way around, where givers...
And a good majority of nonprofits do not take any taxable dollars.
Well, not in Maine, they don't. Right. There's very little public funding in Maine for nonprofits. And, we are earning our keep.
Yes.
And, in the case of Maine Maritime Museum, as I mentioned, 84% of our visitors are coming from out of state. So we are, in fact, a net importer of taxable dollars.
Right.
We have a staff. We spend money. Our economic impact is, something like $24 million a year. And most of that money is not coming from taxpayers, and it's not coming from Maine people at all. It's coming from out of state, and we are funneling
that's found
it.
Money.
It's we could have a whole nother.
So we
need to have more sessions on this.
Okay, we can do that, but we do have to go to our midpoint identifier right now. And every week at this time, we do have a trivia question that you know nothing about.
Yeah, that'd probably be easy to find one that I know nothing about.
Well, I try and do research on these. So here's your trivia question, and I'll ask you the question, and we'll go to the midpoint. Sometimes a structure is built in the water that is similar to a buoy. It acts as a marker. What marine animal is it named after?
Oh, my God. So I'm thinking a channel buoy, but that's not named after a marine.
I have to do my thing now.
Oh, man. Okay.
This is WMPG 90.9 and 104.1 FM Community Radio of Southern Maine and Eastern New Hampshire. Today we have Amy Lent. What are you looking at, Deb? You don't know the trivia question? Amy Lent, Executive Director of the Maine Maritime Museum. So the trivia question, sometimes a structure is built in the water that is similar to a buoy. It acts as a marker. What marine animal is it named after? Should we not give the answer and see if any of our callers know the answer? Why don't we do that?
I sure don't.
We'll do that. We'll give the answer at the end and see if any of our callers have the answer for this one. All right.
Well, we should tell folks that the number is 780-4909.
That would be helpful.
Maybe one of our curators is listening in.
All right, so you rely heavily on volunteers.
We do.
What are some of the ongoing issues that you have managing that number of volunteers?
Well, that's
Because
a
people
good
don't
question.
understand that there's a flip side of it too.
Right. And in fact, a board member once said, "Oh, I wish I could have, 200 people working for free at my business." And I said, "Okay, well, that's, it is great. They're, super enthusiastic, interested people, but they work on their own schedule. They work the hours and the days that are convenient to them, and they do the things that they want to do." For the most part. So, it's in fact, it's a enormously satisfying situation to work in a place where, we've only got 26 paid staff. So 250 volunteers, 26 paid staff, we're outnumbered. So we come in to work and there's all these people there who aren't coming in because they're getting paid. They're coming in because they choose to do that today. So that's a great feeling to work with all these people who really want to be at the museum. But as I said, they do the work they want to do, when they want to do it, how they want to do it. And if they take off 3 weeks to, go on vacation somewhere, well, there's not, you just have to scramble.
Right.
So it makes it much more complicated to staff, much more complicated to, manage the workflow. And, we're fortunate, as I said, to have that many people who are so committed. And we've got volunteers who will be there 3 or 4 times a week.
Wow.
All summer long. They're just, really, really involved and love being there, but they're going to do what they want to do. And that's,
So
the
do you
way
have
it is.
a formal volunteer training program?
We do. We have, in fact, a lot of training for both our, rank and file volunteers, if you want to call it that, and our board as well, because it's my thinking that, people want to do well. They want to know what to do and how to do it well,
Right.
and they want to thrive and be successful, and they can't do that if you just throw them in and tell them to figure it out.
So I'm going to put you on the spot again.
I'm so used to that, though. Keep going.
And you have a tremendous range of programs.
We do.
But if you had to pick one
Mm-hmm.
that you wanted to tell a donor about to help raise money, what would it be?
Well, we do a lot of things, everything from ecology to exhibits and, all kinds of things that museums are accustomed to doing. But the thing that is the most kind of emotionally compelling for me anyway, and I think for a lot of people, is the work that we do on our boat shop. So we have a fully staffed active boat shop with one boat shop manager and about 35 volunteers. And people come in and help on boat building projects for us with historic vessels and things that we're refurbishing and so forth. But the heart and soul of that program is a school program that we do 2 days a week. On Wednesdays, students from Woolwich come to the museum for the entire school day for the whole year from September to June. And on Fridays, students from South Bristol come to the museum, similarly, a full day a week, all school year long. And this has been going on for, I think, 16 or 17 years now. So it's a small group of kids. It might be 10 or 15 at the most. They're spending their entire school year together learning how to build boats. Okay, but the boat is really just the thing that happens at the end. That's not really what
Right.
they're learning. They're working with each other. They're working with our volunteers that are another generation from them. And our Kurt Spiridakis, who runs that program, is one of the best educators I've ever witnessed. You watch him working with kids and you get teary, because, like the excellence that's there. And some of these kids are from some. It's not a program that is designed for kids who have challenging home lives by any means, but in any group of 7th and 8th graders, there's going to be a kid who's got some stuff that he's dealing with, or she. And we have had so many instances of kids telling us that the only reason they stayed in school that year was because of the boat building program. It made them feel like they were part of something. It made them feel that they could accomplish things they never imagined they could do before. A lot of these kids show up and they don't know how to use a hammer. By the time they're done, they can add fractions in their head. They can do complex geometry. They can work every kind of power tool. And that sounds simple enough, but I actually took this boat building program 2 years ago over winter. We did it for adults because I had been witnessing it for so long. And I said, I have to do this myself. Right. And it was the hardest thing, trying to fit a plank onto a boat. It just is a whole lot harder than it looks. And these 7th and 8th grade kids do it themselves. So the volunteers are there to coach them and teach them, but they do it. And by the time they're finished with that program, it has literally transformed them. And I met a teacher this past June when we launched the boats from the last year's class, who was one of the very first students. And she said she never forgot what she learned in that program, and it made her feel that she was capable of anything that she really wanted to do. And we have stories like that happen every year where kids literally they would have dropped out of school, but they don't because we don't let them drop out of the boat building program. It's not an option.
Right.
So they stay because of what they get out of that.
And if a donor wanted to make a donation to help support the boat program?
Well, if they wanted to support the boat program or anything that museum does, and, as a fundraiser in your past, right, that donors often get excited about one particular project, this or that small thing. But really what helps all of those small projects thrive is a thriving overall organization. Right. So, we encourage donors. Obviously, if there's something particularly that they want to support, I'm going to be grateful for that. I would encourage anybody who wants to support the museum or any organization to think about, there's a lot of things that it takes to make that program happen that might not necessarily seem to have anything to do with that program. Right. You've got to pay a finance officer in order to, keep the books in order to make that program happen. So things like that are hugely helpful to us.
And if someone wanted to make a donation, how would they do that?
They could do it online. We have a website, www.mainmaritimemuseum.org. Checks, cash, stocks, gifts of boats,
land giving,
land,
firstborn.
Yeah, so we'll take financial support in any manner and way, shape, or form that people want to provide it to us. But I would encourage people to come and visit and get involved and see. And I think that they would be encouraged to support the museum if they did.
So I have a real short, funny story.
Okay.
I get an email this morning. How was my show yesterday? Because they knew you were going to be on my show. And I emailed back and I said, well, the show's today. And the person said, oh, yeah. So I promised I'd give a shout out to your development director.
Oh, hi, Janice.
And Janice is the development director, and she's been there how long?
She was the first person I hired, first full-time staffer I hired, and she's been there for 8 years, 8.5 for me, 8 years for Janice. She's been phenomenal.
Wow. So do you have any questions for me?
Well, you talk to a lot of different nonprofit leaders in this program, right? So what sort of themes and trends do you hear people talking about?
Besides needing more money? The trends are real interesting. It depends on the size of the organization. Uh-huh. But, you're one of the fortunate ones that have a very strong volunteer program. Yeah. And volunteers are a gap that I'm sensing. And then how do you allocate the time to do the training for the volunteers?
Yeah.
How do you had talked earlier in the show about several levels of planning and reports that you've gotten. Mm-hmm. How many organizations use those type of reports as paperweights?
Oh, yeah.
And really, it's great that they have the information, but how are they using it?
Yeah.
So it's the same thing when I talk to somebody about a donor management system, where I actually did a demo yesterday where I said to the client, well, you have all this data. How are you using it? Well, it's here. I said, but how are you using the data to raise money?
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm sensing they are so overwhelmed and overburdened with just the day-to-day operations that many times there's not a really good planning process, especially with the smaller shops.
Yeah, it is. It's very, very hard. We have a group of museum nonprofit directors in Bath that get together from time to time, and we just compare notes and chat with each other. And we're fortunate to be one of the bigger ones that has a staff and a development office, and right. A lot of places don't have that. And as the director, you're trying to run your organization and, of course, raising money is part of running your organization, but it takes an absolutely extraordinarily huge amount of time.
Right.
And I think people underestimate to do it right and to do it well, to make people feel engaged and like they're, getting the gift is just the beginning.
Right. And, one of the things I don't think that the community realizes in many ways, for someone like you who has a very highly visible end product. I mean, your widget that you're selling is the museum.
Yep.
So you have to make sure the bathrooms are clean.
Yep.
You have to make sure that the food is good and hot and everything else. And your staff, you probably have a whole staff training program like Disney does about customer service.
Well, I'm on this kick right now. I mentioned
I'm sorry I opened it up.
I know. Now this is my favorite soapbox of the moment. We have been told that we were the best in the world, by two different organizations now. So I'm going around the museum saying, that doesn't look world class.
Right.
That's not world class. That's
But it's
not
still,
world class.
it's still Bath, Maine. We got to have a little.
No, world class all the way.
But part of it is the feel that I think that people feel that it is, you walk in there and you still feel it's Maine.
Right. It needs to be authentic, but excellent.
There's no question about that. What was it, Tom Peter? Thriving on chaos.
Yeah, well, it takes that.
Right. So if you had to tell a nonprofit executive one piece of advice.
Someone actually just talked to me a couple of months ago about starting a nonprofit. My piece of advice was don't. But that's not very helpful.
Well,
Okay,
maybe,
so
maybe
my
not.
advice to a nonprofit director is the same advice that was given to me when I first became a director. So I'll pass that on. It said, never forget that as an executive director, your first job is working with your board and managing your board well, and never forget it.
Right. And it's all about the relationships.
Right.
And building those relationships.
Right.
Well, I'm hearing music. Okay. Well, Amy, thanks for being on the show.
That was great to see you
It was good
again.
seeing you. And any last parting comments or words?
Yeah, I welcome everyone within listening range to come up to the museum. We are open 363 days a year. We're going to be open late, in fact, every Friday and Saturday night through the month of December with a great new exhibit called Ocean-Bound Treasures from the Library that show rare objects and manuscripts and books that I can promise people have absolutely never seen before and will be amazed to see here in Maine.
And if you haven't been up there, it's worth the drive. So, again, thank you. Next week, we have Sarah Roof-Lindquist. Sarah's the CEO of the Maine Women's Fund. The music appears courtesy of Mike Hubbard. You can find it on www.michaelhubbardmusic.com. Check out Mike's website to see where he's playing this weekend. Thanks to Deb Danger, Nonprofit Insider's executive engineer. You can catch Deb on Morning Street, Fridays at 6:30 a.m. If you know of a nonprofit that should be on the show, please email me at npi@davidunger.net. Past shows are archived at www.tcmgr.com, NP Insider tab. Until next week.
And don't forget to stay tuned for Zvuki Rusi at 1:30, music from Mother Russia. WMPG's on the air thanks to donations from our listeners and through grant support from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. The CPB promotes the growth and development of public media and communities throughout America. Online at cpb.org.
And welcome to Zvuki России, music from Mother Russia.